Hello, I'm Chai Hafilenia. Welcome to Talk Thursday. Earlier this week, the Energy Regulatory Commission ordered the wholesale electricity spot market, or WESM, to cut down on the generation charges it imposed on power distributor Meralco. Meralco cited higher prices at the spot market to justify its record 4 peso and 15 centavo per kilowatt hour rate hike in December, which was temporarily stopped by the Supreme Court. Meralco was earlier accused of jacking up prices in the spot market, but lawyer Ray Espinosa said its high bids in the spot market were part of a strategy. With us today is Meralco's Utility Economics Head, Larry Fernandez, to speak about the recent developments in the power industry. Good afternoon, Larry.
Good afternoon, Chai.
Thank you for joining us. Recently in the news, there was a report about the ERC coming out with the results of its probe. But before we go into that, I'd like to ask you, I think this is a question that many people are asking. Why are electricity rates so expensive in the Philippines, especially if you compare it to other countries in the region? Why are we one of the most expensive in the region, in Southeast Asia?
That's a very difficult question. And a couple of years ago, Meralco engaged an international consultant to help us understand that situation. First, we wanted him to verify if how rates in the Philippines compared to other countries, particularly our neighboring countries like Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, Taiwan. And the second was, more importantly, to identify what accounted for any discrepancy or difference in the rates. And in his findings, he found out two things. One, the rates in the Philippines are very similar to the rates in Singapore and Western Australia, but those three are higher than the rates in countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, Taiwan, and South Korea. And according to his study, about 80% of the difference was due to subsidies that the utilities in those countries received from the national government. So in effect, the cost to produce and deliver power to customers is similar in all countries, but in countries like Malaysia, Thailand, and Indonesia, the cost is partly defrayed by the national government, and they're not charged to end users.
Will you know what percent is subsidized, or is this is it a substantial portion?
The level of subsidy differs for various countries, but it can be as high as 50% of the rate. So, for example, I think in Indonesia, about half of the cost of power is subsidized by the government, partly through grants in the budget of the state given to the local utility, or through below market rates fuel that are provided to the utility.
Is this something that we should try out? Is it something that would work here in the Philippines?
The contrast between countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, and Thailand, and the Philippines and Singapore. In the Philippines and Singapore, the term that the consultant used was that the rates in those countries are cost reflective.
Meaning?
So we reflect in the rates to end users what it actually costs to produce and deliver power. But in the Philippines, aside from reflecting the cost in the bills, there are also other components like taxes and royalties on the fuel that become part of the rates to consumers. And that contributes to the total rate to end users.
Is there something else that we can do to drive down or to pull back prices or costs of electricity?
There were the major recommendation to bring down power in a significant way, the cost of power in a significant way, was for the country to add additional and more efficient generating capacity into the system. So the key is for the country to incentivize the building of additional and fuel-efficient generating capacity, and that will help bring down prices in the Philippines.
What else are driving prices up? What are other factors?
Other factors, especially in a global sense, over the years, for example, we've seen fuel prices like oil prices and coal prices go up. And actually, in terms of generation cost, fuel accounts for about 60% of the total cost of generation. So to an extent, we also need, as a country, to look at our fuel mix and perhaps diversify our sources of fuel to also address our dependence on any kind of fuel.
Are we heavily dependent on which particular source of power?
Right now,
In
for
terms of
example,
percentages?
in Luzon, about 50% of power in the Meralco area comes from the natural gas plants in Batangas. And those are fueled by the natural gas from the Malampaya gas field in Palawan.
Yeah.
And about 45% of the Meralco source is supplied by coal-fired power plants. Some of that coal is from indigenous sources, such as the one that is from Semirara, providing fuel to the Calaca plants in Batangas. But most of the other coal-fired power plants make use of imported coal, mostly from Indonesia.
Why aren't we able to generate sufficient power? You mentioned a while ago that there's not enough power that's generated, and I know that it would probably take some time to be able to develop plants, to build plants. Are there enough players? Are there enough investors? Is the market open to these investors?
Actually, in the Philippine market, over the years, we've seen a lot of new investors into the power sector, and more significantly, many of these new investors were not in the power sector just a few years ago. Examples include the San Miguel Group, the Ayala Group, and the Metrobank Group. All those companies before were not in the power sector, but with the opening up of the industry to investors, those companies have decided to invest heavily into the generation sector. So I think the intent of investors to go into power generation is there. It needs to be supported by perhaps by some more deliberate framework in the regulatory environment.
Are there enough incentives for investors to or companies to shift to power generation?
The attraction is there. The potential for investments, I think, are seen by those conglomerates. Many of the issues come in terms of uncertainty in the investment environment. For example, we have right now part of the reform process in the industry is allowing end users to get supply of power from competing retailers. So starting around July last year, we allowed certain companies, certain end users, to take supply not from their incumbent utility like Meralco, but from other retail suppliers. But that means that they can be supplied by other companies, but that also means that companies like distribution utilities, since our load is slowly transferring to other suppliers, our ability to forecast our load is also reduced because we don't know which customers will shift to another supplier. So our ability to contract with new generation is to that extent reduced. If we have more visibility on the schedule of allowing these customers to shift suppliers, then that might clarify the environment for all investors of generation. So some generators might choose to go directly to end users to contract and underpin their generation investment.
But what's actually holding back these investors from going all out? And are there certain uncertainties or things
there are a slew of uncertainties. One is the difference in local government policies for locating the plants. Others are the ability of contracting parties. Some contracting parties are not as creditworthy as the banks would like. So the ability to finance new power projects is sometimes not there. So there are different factors.
How about corruption? Is this also one of the disincentives, especially if they have to deal with local government units?
I think the consultant that we hired before, he mentioned that developers all over the world are familiar with the difficulties in putting up power plants. And the Philippines is not different from other countries where it's difficult to site power plants. And those developers know how to work within that environment. So I think it's more for the Philippine specific case.
Yeah.
It's that power sector specific concerns. For example, we have small cooperatives that might not be able to support long-term contracts with generators. So those are sector-specific issues that are the ones that need to be addressed to ensure to attract more power generation into the country.
You're skirting the question, but I'm curious. Yeah, although the Philippines shares the same environment as other countries, was corruption mentioned as one of the factors that maybe a major company or a foreign investor would have second doubts or think twice before actually going in and building?
Yes, I would first have to say that I don't have direct experience in power generation development. But from what I've heard in the industry, they recognize that there are issues for different local governments, but they know how to work within that environment. So that by itself is not really the disincentive in the Philippines to put up power plants.
Also, I think when we talk about electricity prices, inevitably people will say there's really collusion among the big players, and that includes Meralco. How do you respond to that?
For distribution utilities like Meralco, the bill actually shows the extent to which the Philippine power prices are transparent and the way that the industry operates in a transparent manner. The bill shows which portions of the bill go to which sectors of the industry. So the generation charge goes to generation sector, transmission charge, the transmission sector, and the distribution charge goes to distribution utilities like Meralco. And especially for regulated sectors like distribution utilities, all our charges are closely scrutinized by the regulator, and they're transparently computed. In fact, the computation of the generation charge of Meralco is posted regularly on our website, including the amounts paid to each supplier for each month. So in that sense, the control is there to make sure that the dealings of the distribution utility with the generators and the spot market are done in a transparent manner and are supported by rules and documentation.
But the premise here is that the regulators are able to do their job well, and they're strictly monitoring prices and all that. But I think even ERC has said that they don't have enough people to really watch closely and monitor. So as far as regulation is concerned, there might be constraints. And if you look at the players also, they're the usual suspects, and they're the usual big companies. What are our assurances or proof that there's really no collusion here and this is as transparent as can be?
See, the companies in the power sector they are not new companies, and they are actually very reputable companies, like the Ayala Group, the First Generation Group, the San Miguel Group, and they recognize that businesses has to be conducted in good faith, in a forthright manner, and we know that they bring that philosophy into their operations in the power sector.
We also heard that Meralco intends to go into the business of generating power itself. Is this something that you think would be best in the long term? Would it make your operations more efficient?
As a player in the power sector, we would like to also participate in providing that solution. There is a recognition that the country needs new capacity continuously over the long term to support its economic growth, and if we can provide that investment in a more cost-effective manner, then we are willing to do that investment. If we can find somebody else or a partner that can do it more efficiently, then we're really willing to partner with that, and we won't have to do it by ourselves.
There's just a related question here. How would you, just going back to the allegations of collusion, how would you explain, and I'm sure this has been asked of you, people already know when the Malampaya plant would be shut down for scheduled repairs. that's predictable. We know when that would happen. But in this particular case, the outages happened all at the same time, and this was simultaneous. And people found this to be very, very suspicious, and therefore, they conclude that this is one clear evidence of possible collusion. Do you agree?
In terms of investigations into the collusion, that's something that's ongoing, and I think it's best to wait that the regulator finish that investigation. That kind of investigation needs a lot of information from different parties, and I know that the regulator has been collecting that information from the different stakeholders. In terms of the impact of the Malampaya outage on power rates, you're correct. That has been anticipated. I think one difference that we had in the outage for late last year was that it occurred simultaneous with some scheduled maintenance of some large power plants. Last year was an election year. We actually had 2 elections, the national elections and the barangay elections.
Yes.
And during those periods, the power plants were asked not to perform their maintenance during those months, the election months, because our election system depended on reliable power. So that reduced the number of months as windows for maintenance schedules. So we saw that some scheduled maintenance was bunched up towards the last few months of 2013. What we did not foresee was the level of forced outages or unscheduled outages that happened in the last 2 months. And I think that's the subject of the investigation.
I see. How about the under offers? There's a must offer requirement, but not everyone offered the power that full capacity. Is that also suspicious?
I think it's important. It will be important to ask the parties the reasons for under offers. There are valid reasons for not offering capacity. If the plant was actually under maintenance, or if the plant ran out of fuel, then the capability to deliver power is really not there, and they will not be able to make offers. So there are indications that there are plants that did not offer. Actually, there are 2 situations: plants that did not offer all their capacity, or plants that offered their capacity, were instructed to generate but did not generate to the level that they were instructed. So I think those are the 2 things that's the subject of the investigation, and we need to know the reasons behind those, and then I'm sure some of the generating companies will be able to explain certain reasons for that. But we'll have to see what the results of the investigation will be.
How about on your part, on Meralco's part, because you know that there are scheduled Malampaya shutdowns? What exactly do you do as a company to prepare for this?
For several months before the scheduled Malampaya shutdown, we were already talking with other generators to augment capacity. So that's why a few months before the Malampaya schedule, we closed a contract with the Thermomobile peaking power plant, and we brought it before the regulator for approval in September. And also we were coordinating with our suppliers, the ones that had scheduled maintenance, to ask them if they could reschedule their outages. So there was actually one power generator that agreed to a move in their schedule. The Calaca power plant, instead of going offline in December, they moved it to January. So those are things that we did. That's on the supply side to augment capacity in the generation. We were also advising customers about the upcoming situation, advising them to be more energy efficient, because reducing demand is another way to manage the situation. And also we were coordinating with other stakeholders like the government, advising them that this is going to happen, the outage of the pipeline and the power plants, and giving some recommendations on what can be done to mitigate the impact.
How about the under offers? Is this a regular occurrence, or is this the first time that this actually happened?
I don't have actually information on that, but I think it's important that for the months affected, the finding was that there were not all available capacity was offered. So I think that's the point of the investigation right now.
From the point of view of the consumers, what's the protection of the ordinary consumer? Because usually when you talk about power, it's very exclusive, it's very technical. There's a lot of jargon, and ordinary consumers don't really understand. So what are the safeguards or protection for ordinary people like us?
That's a good question. On a policy level, the one mechanism is to introduce more transparency into the whole sector. So part of it was already the unbundling or the itemization of the bill. So it was very clear in the bill that what happened in terms of prices in November and December happened in the generation segment. So that's why the investigation is focused into what happened in the generation sector for those months. So in that sense, that gives the entire industry and the consumers more visibility into what's happening into the industry. And we've also seen that in terms of the regulator, their processes and proceedings, they've become more open. We've been comparing regulatory processes between ERC and other regulators, and we've seen that the Energy Regulatory Commission has instituted mechanisms that will allow consumers to participate in the process outside of the formal hearings. So they can conduct public consultations, they post all of their rulings on their website, and we've seen that consumers have been very active.
How about your bilateral contracts? Is it correct? You have about 90%. Is that correct? 90% of your contracts are bilateral, and only 10% for WESM.
We try to limit our exposure to the spot market to less than 10%. In 2013, our exposure was about 7%. In 2012, it was around 8%. So our bilateral contracts, all of the bilateral contracts of distribution utilities, they need to undergo regulatory approval. So what does regulatory approval mean? We submit it to the regulator. We actually have to publish our petition for approval of those contracts in newspapers. We need to provide copies of that petition to the local government, so we give it to the Pasig City LGU before hearings actually start. And in the hearing, before the formal hearings start, the Energy Regulatory Commission conducts what they call an expository presentation. It's an informal event where the petitioner, like Meralco, explains the contents of the petition to consumers, and it's an opportunity for them to ask questions on the petition outside of the formal hearing process. So, and that's done for all the contracts that distribution utilities enter into for their respective markets. So, before we're able to pass on the cost of generation contracts to our customers, they need to undergo that process.
Learning from this, and well, I guess looking ahead and maybe anticipating that something like this could happen again, are you thinking of making any adjustments in your bilateral contracts, for example?
Yeah. For our bilateral, we're asking for additional capacity for contracts with generators. We're also coordinating with all stakeholders on how to improve coordination between, for example, the national grid, the spot market, and the distribution utilities as buyers in the spot market. I think some of the events in November and December revealed some need for improved coordination among all stakeholders to quickly address what's happening in the market.
Looking back, would it have been better if you did not buy power from WESM during the Malampaya shutdown?
The market is there to, it's a market, it's influenced by supply and demand.
Yeah.
So the expectation is that it's transparent. And before November came in, looking at the prices in the spot market from October and before that, the expectation was that the prices will not reach as high as they did in November and December. Given what happened in the prior months, I think everybody was did not anticipate the amount of forced outages that happened. Everybody also did not anticipate the level of capacities not offered into the market. So these are things that maybe we're all trying to better understand, and with the hope of avoiding that in the future.
The 62 peso price was quite high, though.
The 62 peso, it's an offer ceiling. It's a valid bid.
Yeah.
And it's usually a way to signal to the market that you don't want to be dispatched. So the market operates by dispatching cheaper plants first. So you don't expect, if you offer a high price, you don't expect to be dispatched. Before the November and December months, from the time that the spot market started in 2006 up to October, there was only 12 times, so 12 trading intervals or hours, that the 62 peso price was reached. So the expectation was that that price will not be reached in November and December when demand is low. The last time 62 was reached was in summer, in May. So since demand was 600 megawatts below summer, the expectation was that 62 will not be reached. So, and it wasn't supposed to be dispatched.
But it was.
But it was. So the immediate reason for that was that apparently there wasn't enough capacity in the grid. That's why the market called for thermomobile and other power plants. There were actually other power plants that also cleared at 62. They had to be dispatched, apparently because the market did not have enough generation capacity.
I think this is where the suspicions of collusion will come in. That because if you set a high ceiling, let's say 62 pesos, and then the other players say, let's don't go all out, don't offer, and these are the under offers, then the prices get higher until you reach the ceiling. So, and it's only the players who know about this. It's very exclusive. As
I think
said
that's part of the investigation. But for Meralco and for our counterparty, we can say that while the prices reached those levels, Meralco did not pay our counterparty that price. We paid the contract price, and our counterparty did not receive 62. They received the contract price. So they did not benefit from that price, and we did not pay that price to our counterparty.
What would you expect to come next after ERC's order to bring down WESM prices?
For Meralco, it's either that the PEMSI, the spot market, will give us a revised bill based on the new recalculated prices, or it's within the power of the Energy Regulatory Commission to make their own calculations based on the spot market calculations and tell us what generation charge to use instead of the generation charge that was initially calculated for December and January. So we're preparing to implement those new generation charges based on the recalculated spot market rates.
Is this bad news for Meralco?
For Meralco, as we've been trying to educate customers, this is a generation cost. It passes through the utility. Any increase or reduction does not benefit or accrue to the distributor, but just goes through the utility in terms of the bill. So in the same way that we reflected reductions in the generation charge in February and March, if there are any reductions in the generation charge due to the spot market calculation, we'll just transparently reflect those amounts in the revised generation charges.
Okay, this looks like a very complicated problem that will require in-depth solutions and long-term planning and thinking. But what are your medium-term and probably even long-term proposals to deal with this problem?
In terms of you're right. It's a complex issue. There are a lot of moving parts and you have to address all of those at the same time. So one is trying to attract additional generation capacity into the system. And that's where Meralco is also trying to come in, to try to see where Meralco as an investor can come in with cost-efficient and fuel-efficient new generation capacity. We also are looking at the fuel mix, how we can better diversify the dependence of the country in terms of fuels. And if we can develop more indigenous fuel sources. That's something we're also going to support. We're also looking at cost-efficient renewable energy sources, especially wind power. So that's in the generation sector. In terms of the transmission sector, closer coordination, especially in terms of maintenance schedules, so that we can ensure that our customers receive reliable service and reduce the number of outages that they can potentially experience. In the distribution sector, we've seen that the Meralco market has been developing into an international market. We have manufacturing companies that are exporters. They operate in the global market. We have BPOs that also operate in the global market, and they require more reliable service from the utility. They don't want any outages because it will interrupt their international operations. So we've had to plan for more stringent reliability requirements and adequacy requirements from the customers, and we're ready to invest to meet those requirements of customers. And then in terms of the other components of the bill, for example, like taxes and universal charges, we've been trying to advocate more deliberate, more conscious implementation of any additional charges into the rates, especially taxes and universal charges. And if we can bring down the tax burden on the industry, such as the royalties on fuels from indigenous sources, we also support that.
So can consumers expect rebates in the next few months?
If the spot market price, the recalculated spot market prices will require a reduction in the calculated generation charge, yes, we are ready to implement those rebates.
Okay. Thank you very much. We've been speaking with Larry Fernandez. He's from Meralco on the issues surrounding the power industry. I'm Chai Hofalenia. Thank you for joining us.